listeners. Welcome back to the pod. And I am here today with Divya Joshi. Divya, tell our audience a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Thank you very much, Kristen. I've been looking forward to this conversation with you. Just a few highlights about who I am and what made me who I am. My father is from India. My mother is from Austria. So I was very fortunate to grow up with this multicultural mythology, history, culture that I think was, very formational. I am a physician. I'm a pediatric oncologist, which is a childhood cancer specialist. And I knew I wanted to be a doctor from a very early age on. And the story, if you will indulge me for a moment.
Of course.
I was about, I would say maybe 7 or 9 years old, traveling in a train in India, very rural area. I was sitting in the train with the candy on my lap, looking out the window. We pulled into a train station. And there was a group of children about my age that were obviously very ill, very, very skinny, huge tummies, and looked very sick. And I had never seen anything like that before. So I asked my parents what was wrong with them. And after their age-appropriate explanation that these children were very sick, they were starving, they were likely dying, I decided I needed to do something about this. And that led me to wanting to become a physician. I would finish by saying my second big transition, professionally speaking, happened about, I would say, 12 years ago, when moving from a clinician who saw one person at a time, trying to make an impact, one child and one family at a time, I decided I really wanted to make a difference on a bigger level and a bigger scale. And that is when I entered into administration or leadership, stopped practicing, but I hope will have had an impact on more children and more lives by really driving to a certain degree how clinical practice occurs. That's who I am in a nutshell.
In a very, very nice nutshell. Well, first of all, thank you for the work that you have done, especially in the pediatric oncology field, because that is some hard work, and it takes a special person to be able to do that. So I applaud you for your work in that area. And so that kind of brings us to, with your background as a physician, and I'm sure that there's a lot of other influences that played a part in this, that we're going to be talking today about the physical pillar of well-being. And we're actually going to be hitting on quite a few topics within the physical pillar. So we're going to be talking about some sleep stuff. We're going to be talking about the connection between the brain and the body, between our physical body and our emotional bodies. And nutrition is even going to make a part in this. We're going to talk about some alternative medicine. So I am so excited to dive into all of this, because this is one of those areas that I consistently find myself researching, just trying to understand my body better, but how can I optimize? How can I have the best well-being possible? So to start us off, we're going to be talking about physical well-being, but I'm wondering if one can even separate physical from emotional well-being.
I think that's a fascinating question, and something that I think we've learned a lot about lately. There used to be this very strict differentiation between the physical self, or the physical being, as you pointed out, Kristen, and the emotional or mental part. And I think my first eye-opening encounter with the fact that these really are two sides of the same coin was most likely in my teens, when I was very interested in the same things you mentioned. And I came across the term and the concept of psychoneuroimmunology. And that was just so intriguing, because for the first time for me as a young person, it really showed how our immune system, which fights and protects us against illness or invading organisms, is so intricately linked to how we feel. And this is the psycho and the neuroimmune part. And we now know very clearly that stress in our brain, those stressful states or anxiety states, have a very direct impact on our blood pressure, which we all know, right? Our blood pressure goes up, we can feel it physically. And of course, we know that a chronically elevated blood pressure leads to cardiac, heart, vascular consequences down the road. And this is just one example. But this, for me, opened my eyes to how mind and body are really very, very closely related. Another example that we have all experienced is when we feel an anxiety or grief, somebody we love. And I have had a death. My mother died 2 years ago. That was a physical, in addition to an emotional experience. We all remember or feel this tightness in the chest, the cramping in our tummies. And by the same token, the other way around, when we are getting ready for an exam, we have maybe similar experiences. I think the second eye-opening event occurred just maybe 5 years ago. And that is when I discovered something called epigenetics. We have found, and I think we're all aware, that children, but also adults who grow up in poverty and in stressful circumstances end up having certain diseases more often than those children who grow up in more benign circumstances, shall we say. And what we have learned is that emotional stress, such as being witness to family violence or parents yelling at each other, or being bullied, purely emotional experiences, do something to the way our bodies and cells decide to express certain genes. And those genes, of course, is part of our DNA script of who we are as a body, can translate down the road in adult age to things like depression and anxiety that intuitively might make sense, but also to cancer, to obesity, and to organ damage, specifically liver and lung chronic diseases. So that is, to me, the perfect, very, very researched example of how emotional stress or emotional influences directly translate into physical consequences. And of course, the philosophical question is, where's the limit? Where do we translate? And is there a limit, or is this just, is the mind-body continuum truly a continuum, two ends of the same spectrum?
I mean, I would tend to believe that they're on the same spectrum. I think it's just an ongoing continuum. And I love that you bring up epigenetics, because this was something that I just kind of found out about and started looking into just a few years back. And it was, I mean, just revelatory to me. It explained a lot about myself, because it was like, oh, well, that would make sense. Like mine in particular was, my mom was in a very, very high stress state when she was pregnant with me. And I've always been like on the higher anxiety side, probably because I bathed in all of those stress hormones, in utero the whole time. But what I thought was so interesting too, and I think I read this in Gabor Mate's book, where, talking about epigenetics, that it's not like it changes your DNA. It just turns on or off certain traits or characteristics within your DNA. So while you feel like you may have been born with this predisposition, there are ways that you can help yourself to turn that switch off into, and so therefore living from a different direction. You're not destined to be, anxiety ridden for the rest of your life. There are ways to work with this. And interestingly enough, a lot of those come with movement of the body. So there's the emotions and the body coming back together again. So tell me a little bit more about, I noticed, I would say maybe over the last year or so for sure, that there's been this increasing popularity with things that are outside of Western medicine, alternative medicines. What do you think is going on there?
So I think several things. I actually started to encounter this phenomenon, if you will, when I was practicing. And these families were, of course, desperate to try and obtain a cure for their child with cancer. And there is always this need, of course, you trust your physician, but might there be something else? And I think that part of it, of this increased interest, is the fact that those who are severely ill and have been ill for a while, they seek out alternatives. So I think one of the components is this desperate need for survival and for cure, for alleviation of suffering. The other component is many people who had those severe illnesses didn't survive very long. Now they do. And so I think with this prolonged survival due to, improved supportive care and improved development of treatments, of course, I think people have more time to research. But the third component that comes to mind, Kristen, is people read more, and as the world has shrunk, knowledge has expanded, and traditional cure and health philosophies, I think of China, I think of India, I think of Germany, sometimes thousands of years old, that wisdom is now just being shared and talked about as conversations increase globally. And so I think with more awareness, then of course the Western side of medicine tries to explore those, validate those, vet those, and then recommend those. So I think it's a multifactorial element, and it's good to see that people talk and that people use their curiosities to explore things that are a little off of mainstream. And we all know that many of the very traditional age-old medications started out in a flower. Yeah. So many things started off of mainstream and became mainstream. And so I think that's wonderful. It speaks to an open mind.
Yeah. From my experience of Western medicine, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that the philosophy is more about treating the symptom versus getting to the root of the problem. And I feel like with a lot of the alternative methods, it's the other way around. Like they want to find out what's the root of this and how can we get at the root so that the symptom doesn't continue. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that or no?
Yes, I think what you said is very interesting, because I think it's yes or no, yes and no. Let me just take oncology because I'm more familiar with that. But we used to, like you very, very correctly pointed out, really only understand the symptom, right? Somebody came in and had a big lump on their face. So we tried to cut out the lump because we didn't understand much more. Now, when somebody comes to us with a lump, we have the tools of looking at genes, of looking at the cells, the cell type. We can stain them. We can go into the cell and use molecular studies to understand exactly what type of cell and how has that cell been modified to become pathological and cause that lump. So I think initially, we were very helpless and primitive in our ways of treating disease, and could only rely on the symptoms because we didn't know anymore. We didn't have imaging techniques. We didn't have pathology. Now we have genes and microbiology and many ways. So I think that's one part of the story. The other part of the story, though, is I think the fundamental difference between Western medicine and, I don't know if calling it Oriental is appropriate because Germany and homeopathy kind of falls into that, is the concept that illness or disease is an imbalance. And so there is this imbalance that's caused by something. And if we can right that balance, we can return to our inherent healthy state, which of course then presupposes that we are intrinsically at a healthy baseline state, which as a pediatric oncologist, I know we are not necessarily, because babies are born with leukemia, rare, but it happens. But so it's very interesting that let's just call it for our conversation, Oriental medicine, really tries to right that balance. And it does it in different ways. Ayurveda, which is the ancient Indian, maybe 6,000-year-old way of thinking about health and well-being and illness, really believes that if a person is sick, it's an imbalance in their mental being. And so how can you right that? And the traditional, and I'm full disclosure, I'm not an expert on any of these. I just have a high level understanding. The Chinese medicine believes that the qi or the qi, which is the stream of energy that goes through your body, flows, is an imbalance due to a blockage somewhere. And you can unblock that and allow the energy to flow, which again leads to improvement. And of course, homeopathy has another different way, but yes, there might be two different ways. But again, I would say, Kristen, as the Western, if we want to call it that, medicine has evolved, I think we have become much better at including mental well-being, psychology, psychiatry. We still have in the US and in Europe a certain unfortunate stigma as it concerns mental health. But we now know, as we talked just 2 minutes ago, that mental and physical health are really part of the same continuum. I think we're beginning to understand epigenetics and how this is a two-way street. How, if one wants to put it this way, mind and body are two sides of the same entity and have this constant cross-communication. And so maybe all these different ways of looking at wellness and illness, maybe say the same story, but reading from a different book, and how we can each learn from each other. The Western medicine, I will close by saying, Kristen, is very, very keen on proving things right. And something can only be proven right if it has been disproven wrong. And this is Karl Popper, an Austrian philosopher. You have to be able to prove it wrong first. So how wonderful if one could include and combine everything with the understanding that certain things are hard to prove.
Yes, like exploring all of the options that one might have in these different areas. And I think about too, when you talked about psychoneuroimmunology, is that there's now this correlation that's being found between people that have like mental health disease and autoimmune diseases, because those have been on a severe increase over the last 10 years, but now they're starting to make this correlation. And there's, that proof again. Now, does it prove anything wrong? I don't know, but it certainly shows that there's something there to be looked into. I certainly hope that Western medicine continues to expand into this, and looking at when you see a patient, it's not just taking in the physical body. What's wrong with the physical body? It's like, let's talk about what else is going on upstairs and see if there's correlations there between the symptoms and what might be going on in their lives. That's my hope anyway.
Yeah. You segue into something really interesting, and that is that we, and I'm speaking about physicians, we oftentimes, including myself, tend to underestimate a patient's or a person's intuitive understanding of what's going on. And I think our Western approach is much more unidirectional in saying, this is the best treatment. We don't, I think, take enough time. I've tried to do this in my later years of clinical practice when I learned that people know a lot more on a very intuitive level. They're not physicians, but it is very helpful to have this dialogue. And I think knowing a little bit about how the conversation goes with a naturopath or with an Ayurvedic physician, a practitioner, it starts with a very lengthy intake. It's not just a quick, how are you? Let's go through a few organ systems. It's a very lengthy intake about an individual's life, about what's going on in their lives, about their perceived stressors, and really getting a sense of them as an entity, as a human being. And, we can then, of course, segue, which we won't, into how our healthcare system does not allow us to do that. But that's correct. But yes, I'm hoping that things will get better. I will finish on something that I find fascinating. Going back to the Western physician and Western scientists need to prove things unequivocally to be able to advocate for it. I don't think we really understand how acupuncture works. If I were to ask a traditional Chinese practitioner, they would be able to explain it very easily. You have the meridians, the energy, it's blocked, you put the needle in and you unblock it. I have not read anything very conclusive from the Western scientific side, other than beginnings, such as needles might loosen up a certain nerve area where multiple nerves meet and open it up. But what does that really mean in scientific language? So the fascinating part and the gratifying part is that even though we don't completely understand, if we empirically, meaning talking to people, can tell that it makes a difference and it doesn't cause harm, I'm very proud to say that the Western medicine has the humility to, as long as it's safe and empirically shows benefit, to recommend that. And we know that for certain very specific conditions and diagnoses, Medicare reimburses for acupuncture. So I think that's a good start.
Yes, I do. I think it's great because anything that we feel like is expanding, I think is a good way to move. I think when we start getting into the contraction of no, it has to be this way, this is the only right way, that's when we start getting into a little bit of the murky waters when it comes to medicine. Yeah,
I
for
think to be
sure.
open-minded and safe at the same
Yes.
time is the way to go.
Yes. And try everything. It may, you may go do acupuncture. I have never had an acupuncture session where I felt like it actually did something for me.
Mm-hmm.
But, maybe that was the practitioner, or maybe I wasn't in the right mindset for it, or I had already predetermined in my head that I wasn't going to feel anything from it. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but I think just explore all of the different modalities that are out there for alternative medicine and find what works for you. And it may not be Western medicine, or it might be Western medicine in combination with Ayurveda. I practiced that for a good 6 months. I loved it. It's a lot. It's a lot to do on a daily basis.
Yes.
And so that just kind of slipped by the wayside. But when I did it, I felt great. So I think, just trying things out for yourself, I think, is the best way to approach that.
Yeah. If I can just finish with
Sure.
one statement that I think is important to make for the listeners. In my pediatric oncology practice, would always open the door and ask, are you giving your child any other medicines or anything else that we haven't discussed? And I would always ask it in an open, non-judgmental way, because sometimes there is a risk and sometimes we don't know. And sometimes it is worth researching whether there might be an interaction between a complementary herb medication intervention and traditional medicine. And that is the last thing we want. So I think it's really important for people to understand it is not completely without risk, and always talk to your physician. And hopefully your physician will be very open-minded. I would just research. I would just go online and I would be very open and say, there's no risk, or most of the time I would have to say, we just don't know. But I just wanted to make sure that point is made.
Yes, I think that's a great point to be made, being very transparent with all the members of your care team as far as what you are doing, as well as what you are taking. I had a friend that actually experienced this just recently. She was on a SSRI for depression, and was having trouble sleeping, and had heard somewhere about this molecule called 5-HTP, which is basically like the precursor to tryptophan. You take it 30 minutes before bed, and it's supposed to help you fall asleep, stay asleep. But because it also affects serotonin, it put her into serotonin syndrome. And she's like, that was the most uncomfortable 8 hours of my life, but it's like, you have to tell people that. You have to ask your doctor, hey, not all supplements are created equal or, benign in that sense. They do have effects on pretty serious, like, parts of your body. So always, if you're taking something supplementally, herbs, I think all of it needs to be shared with your provider who's prescribing you medication, and then vice versa with the practitioner who might be supplying you with the herbs or the supplements to take to help. They have to be able to know the whole picture, again, the whole picture.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So now I kind of want to dive into nutrition, and boy, this can be like an all-out war. I mean, there's just so much information out there, so many camps of like paleo's right, or keto's right, or this is right, or that is right. We've been seeing a pretty significant increase in vegetarian and vegan. So maybe let's start with those two diets. What are the health impacts of those two?
Yeah. So the difference between a vegan and a vegetarian is that a vegetarian obviously will not eat meat or seafood, but that a vegan will not eat any foods derived indirectly or directly from animals. So a vegan would not consume dairy products, for example, or even honey. There is a lot of research done on vegetarianism, a little less on vegan, but basically the studies are pretty clear that the benefits hugely outweigh the risks. I'll start with the risks. Being a pediatric oncologist, of course, vitamin B12 can be, and is actually quoted as maybe the only risk of a vegetarian diet, is you might become deficient in that. Quite frankly, every bread and cereal known to humankind has B12 in it. but that is something that needs to be stated. If you are a very young child or pregnant and thereby have slightly differing energy and nutrient requirements, it's just good to be mindful of what you eat. Otherwise, there are only benefits. A vegetarian diet has been linked with decreased cancer risk, with increased longevity, with decreased mental health issues, with decreased obesity. So it's just overall beneficial. I will say that most likely the people who are listening, and most likely you as well, I think we've become sick and tired of hearing people telling us what we what we should and what we shouldn't eat.
Yeah.
And but by the same token, what is the difference between a medicine and food? Isn't that really one and the same? And so I don't want to bore you with
Well, you're definitely not boring me, so this is right up my alley.
I think things that should be relatively easy to do and really make a big impact is try and eat foods that have fewer ingredients. And if you think about it, if I were to bake bread, I would just take water, a little salt, a little sugar, some yeast, obviously some flour, ideally, some non-refined flour. And I would maybe throw some seeds in and that's that. But if we look at what's in a bread I buy in the store, there are so many things in there that I think the science increasingly shows us is not beneficial. So one thing I suggest people do, and what I do, is read the label. The fewer ingredients, the better. If I don't understand what this long chemical term is, I'm not sure I want to eat it. I try to put different colors on my plate. But something that I really would recommend, Kristen, you do. I recently watched a fabulous Netflix documentary about the blue zones.
Yes.
I think it was several episodes. I binge watched them. It was like 2.5 hours. Very, very, very well done. And they looked at different parts of the world. I think there were 5 or 6, where there is a significantly, statistically large number of centenarians.
Yep.
And not only who kind of live along, but who are active, who ride their horse, who plant and harvest their crops, who teach children, who perform, who do handicrafts. And so documentary goes and looks at what sets these blue zones. One of them is in the US, Loma Linda.
Oh, that's where I was born.
Oh, really? Well, yes. You must be super healthy.
Look at that connection.
Yeah. What sets these populations apart? And it's many things, but since we're talking about nutrition, one of the big components is they are not all vegetarians. The California group, Seventh-day Adventists, are, but the others are not. But for them, 90% of what they eat is plant-based, very produce heavy, very fresh, and hand and homemade, and only a little bit of meat, very, very small amounts. So I would recommend watching those, because that really, it brought it to life by sharing stories of these centenarians who are so youthful and energetic, and it's incredible. It really impressed me.
I will definitely have to check that out for sure. It is interesting because I honestly can't remember where I heard something about the centenarians to begin with. It may have been another podcast episode where they interviewed a centenarian, and it was like, they met, and they're like, how are you able to thrive? And, for so long. And they're like, we just did it right. We looked at the things like, this made us feel better. This made us not feel so great. And then it's just this matter of distilling it down to what works for each one of us. And each person's makeup, right, was a little bit different, but they'd figured out what worked for them, what worked for their body. Because that's the thing about nutrition. It's not a one size fits all thing that we're looking at here. This is everybody's body. Had to think about that before I doubled the word there. Reacts differently to different kinds of food. I mean, even gluten is another one that has really taken off. And I think a lot of people that are gluten-free aren't necessarily suffering from celiac disease, but gluten still affects the way that they feel physically. Whereas there's other people that could eat gluten all day and they feel just fine.
Yeah. You know, Kristen, thank you for bringing that up, because I think what I've said so far might be true and it's been published everywhere, but might not be completely easy to do.
Yeah.
But one thing that I think is really, really easy to do is, and that was also highlighted in that movie, and many cultures teach that to their children. You stop eating when you are 80% full. Stop eating when you could eat just a little bit more. Stop eating when you actually feel, like you just said, Kristen, when you feel good about how you feel. Some people feel good when they still feel a little bit of hunger. Some people feel good when they are full. And where are you? What feels good to you? But I think what happened was, particularly in the US, very different in Austria and India, where my parents come from. In the US, where I've lived for more than 25 years now, eating is something we do while doing something else. I read the news on my iPhone and I eat. I talk to somebody and I eat. I watch TV and I eat. I drive in my car and I eat. I run to the office and I eat.
Yeah.
So we lost that introspection of listening to our bodies, what actually feels good. And so I notice that when I go out with friends, I get so caught up in the dialogue, which is the most interesting part, that I sometimes overeat. So I think that's something, at least not that difficult to do, is try and set time apart to eat. One can eat a very healthy diet. I don't spend much time eating. I can do it in 10 minutes.
Yep.
Just focus on how your body, your mind-body continuum responds to what you've eaten. Does it make you feel good? Does it make you feel uncomfortable? I think that would go a big way. Instead of, I see so many toddlers in their strollers with a bag of chips in their hand. They are not being taught to listen to their body's response to the food they're putting inside them.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I know that like the healthcare industry is so guilty of this. It's like you have your lunch, but you're also trying to take care of patients, but you're like getting a couple bites in between here and there. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I do.
It makes it very hard to sit down and have just a mindful meal. But I think the more that we can practice that, whether that be the meals that we have at home, is just making that the only thing that you do. Just sit down and really enjoy the food, taste the food.
Yeah.
And then start to notice those signs of satiety in yourself that you probably do miss when you're like eating on the fly. I think that's a really great point. Speaking to also like when we talk about vegetarian eating, there's a little bit of a controversy around what is considered organic and what is not considered organic in the US. And I want to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it's like something only has to be 20% organic in order to achieve the label of organic.
You know, I would have to check on that.
Okay.
I will give you a wrong answer.
Yeah,
there are different schools of thought about. Predominantly, I think people believe that organic is better, but there is a strong lobby or group of people who don't believe that. So
yeah. And with organic being more expensive, it is one of those things that's kind of sometimes the cost of turn is what keeps us eating non-organic foods, because it is a large increase in price. The other thing that I had a question about, because I know that this is very different in the US than it is in other countries. This was brought to my attention by an Australian friend. The number of additives that we put into our food here, and yet the FDA allows that into our diets.
Yeah, it's very interesting how the FDA is so conservative when it comes to medications. And many times physicians bemoan the fact that the FDA doesn't sometimes release urgently needed drugs a little easier. And yet they are very easygoing on supplements. And supplements is the wrong word, on additives.
Yeah.
Yes, there are additives that are not allowed in Europe, certain colors, for example. I don't know about Australia, but I know that in Europe, they're not allowed. European Union does not allow them, and they're ubiquitous in the US.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because you would think almost sometimes too, that those additives that are in our food could be causing what we need the medication for. There's a little tie in there, I think.
Certainly possible.
You touched on too, like the signs of satiety and knowing when we're full. And I think another epidemic that we're dealing with in America is obesity. And a lot of people think that this comes from being lazy, having poor self-esteem, not being able to control your diet. But I think there's a lot of other reasons that that cause this. And I'm just kind of wondering what your thoughts are around this.
Yeah. Yeah, I also, I think like the majority of people went through my own learning curve. Growing up, I also thought that people eat more, so they get heavy. And of course, there is a very obvious logical correlation. If you put more calories in than you burn, then the calories get translated from energy into mass.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what we have learned a lot recently is, again, two things, going back to epigenetics and going back to the fact that there are certain areas, such as inner city areas, that are called food deserts. And what that means is you drive through certain areas, neighborhoods, and there are no grocery stores. The only place these people who frequently might not have transportation and might be juggling 3 jobs, so there's the time to go food shopping, the only place they can often buy food is a fast food store or one of those mini marts. It's basically
like a convenience
gas
mart.
station, a gas station that has food. And none of these foods are produce. They're all very calorie high, very calorie dense, and have been tinkered with to be extraordinarily tasty. We all have those cravings, right? I mean, I have this craving for chocolate.
Every day, all day.
Yeah, and people love fried foods and certain foods, fast foods. They are tinkered with to be attractive to our taste buds.
Mm-hmm.
And so these people don't exercise much because they're juggling 3 jobs. They don't have a safe area neighborhood. They might get shot. And the food they're exposed to is very calorie dense and cheap. So that is one component. It is an enforced lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
The other component, though, is, and that is now very clear, is that there is a genetic component to obesity. That thought first came to me as I was practicing. There is a condition called Prader-Willi syndrome that is linked with cancer and other medical issues. And those children, oftentimes are heavy. And I asked myself the question, is there a gene for that? And now we know that there are multiple genes, and we don't really understand very much more than that yet. But a person, and I've witnessed this in colleagues who are overweight or obese, and they try and try and try, and they lose weight, but they also start losing hair. And their face gets slim while their body doesn't. So there is something genetic about it. And I think that is so important. Again, speaking as a pediatrician, we shame these people, adults and children, and we make them feel like they are guilty and like they have done this to themselves. And for me, this was a big awakening when I read all the science and the data behind this. One should never be judgmental, even if somebody does something to themselves, because who enjoys being overweight? But people need to love themselves for who they are, and we need to love them for who they are, and we need to understand that it is not a willpower issue. As I said, there's the enforced lifestyle issue, and there's the genetic issue.
Yeah. Even thinking, to the epigenetic portion of that, it doesn't seem like a far throw that if somebody's epigenetics included obesity because their ancestors had to fight for food, had to ration food, that would flip on a switch in their DNA that caused them to be like that, I guess, in a sense, because the mentality was there of get as much food as you can, and because you need it to survive, and then somehow conditioning off of that and flipping that gene back. Then I'd be interested to see if those people then were able to get down to a normal, healthy weight. But it seems like a very real possibility.
That's a very interesting thought. There is an entire generation, my mother was of that age, that are post-World War II children. I mean, post-World War II survivors. And my mother grew up when nothing was available, absolutely nothing. Germany, Austria, that part of the Western world was starting after the Second World War. And I wonder, and that's something I will read up after we are done
Yeah.
talking, is that would be very interesting if somebody has looked at that World War II generation and seen whether they tend to be more cautious about setting food aside or eating more at a time because they might not have more later.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. I don't have an answer.
Interesting thought. I think it was in Gabor Mate's most recent book as well that I read about this child who her grandparents, I think it was either grandparents or great grandparents, had been in Auschwitz and did not survive. And she was trying to commute from work to, I think, like Connecticut to New York or something one day. And when the train would come into the station and it would blare that whistle, she would feel this anxiety just overcome her, like completely frozen, like couldn't get on the train. But as soon as the train left and the sound of the whistle was gone, then she would come back to this regulated state and she could not figure out what it was. And so digging into it and going deeper into it, they found that like the way that whistle sounded was exactly the same way the whistle had sounded in Auschwitz. And through all these generations, it had carried that this was something that caused extreme anxiety or just a fear, like a total immobilization.
That's fascinating. That would be very interesting too. It almost reminds me of the collective unconscious by Jung. But that's an interesting question. I have not heard that story, but that sounds intriguing.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot with epigenetics that we have yet to discover. It's going to be interesting to watch that unfold. So we've talked about nutrition. I think now let's dive into the physical activity part of well-being. Obviously, when we think about the physical pillar, the three things are your physical activity, your nutrition, your sleep, and then your lifestyle choices like smoking, drinking, that, things like that. So we've covered nutrition for sure. Let's talk about physical activity.
I think a lot has been said about that. Ad nauseam. I think people are sick and tired of hearing about that. But if we reflect back to what our bodies were constructed to be, but have evolved into being, we are built for movement, and we need that movement. We need that movement to survive. And lots of anthropological studies have been done talking to bush people like the San in Namibia, or other ancestral people who still, to a certain degree, live those very primitive, wrong word, but you know what I mean, lives. And those lives are punctuated by bursts of energy, which would, I think, be the energy to hunt, and a lot of constant low-grade energy, which is foraging, plucking, harvesting. Later on, once we have agriculture, of course, but I'm talking even more earlier in time. And a lot of time, therefore, is spent moving. And a lot of time is spent sitting around and socializing, but more movement than we do. And I think as over our civilization, we have subspecialized from being somebody who has to take care of my own clothes, my own child rearing, my own house building, my own procurement of food, my own water finding, to somebody doing one very narrow job. And with that has come a very sedentary lifestyle. And now, of course, if we contrast an Amish person's lifestyle, who are much healthier than we are, compared to now with our generation of people who have computers and now our iPhones, I think we have completely moved away from what our bodies really need, which is that certain amount of movement. And the movement is not just important because certain movement strengthens and keeps our bones strong, which is critically important now that we get so much older. Now that we can be centenarians, those bones need to last longer. They can't break on us. So physical activity that is weight-bearing has an impact on those bones, but also weightlifting that stretches the tendons that attach it to the bone are important. We also, of course, know that with activity, we have increased heart rate, we have movement in our blood vessels, there's a very strong correlation with physical activity, or lack thereof rather, and heart disease. So I think all of those are really, really important things. It's difficult, particularly I think in the American society, where we are so focused on work and so focused on success. And success oftentimes means more work. And that's wonderful in a sense, but again, if we don't have the balance, which I think many people don't, then we don't have the time to move. And we go from bed to car to desk and back again.
Yeah.
And, it's difficult. I think the only way, of course, there are recommendations, you need to do, so many hours of intense activity per week and so many hours of moderate activity per week. That'll only make our days longer, and then we run into sleep deficit.
Yeah.
So I think ultimately the answer is going back to what those centenarians in the blue zones have done, which is to strive for balance. And how do we find that balance in our daily lives? But I think that's what to say for physical activity.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you so much in so many ways. And I think too, when I look at like the new technology that has come into play, like the door dashes, the grocery shopping things, Amazon, in a sense too, you can order it on Amazon. It shows up at your front door. You don't have to go out to the store and buy it anymore. And I see that as a loss for us in two ways. A, we're missing out on the movement that it was to go do those things. And even though it's just walking maybe from in the parking lot into the store, et cetera, it's still movement that you're not getting if you're just sitting on your couch ordering DoorDash to come to your front door or Amazon to deliver your thing. The second piece I think we're missing out on there is, the Surgeon General has just announced that we have a loneliness epidemic in this country. And the rate of it is actually exceeding that of depression, which is like shocking. But so when you aren't going to the store to buy the groceries or going to the store to buy whatever you need, you're not interacting with human beings like we used to. And even those small little conversations make a big difference in how we feel about, like, are we attached to our community? Do we have a sense of belonging? And just having that one-on-one connection with another human being. I can imagine the person who, works, only orders DoorDash, only orders up, things off Amazon. I'm like, what a lonely, sedentary life. Like, I would almost assure that person's not happy. I can't say for sure, but that's my thought.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, because that, I think, definitely needs to fit into the topic or the pillar of physical well-being. We know that the equivalent on the physical side of being lonely is smoking 15 to 30 packs of cigarettes a day. So again, the mental and the physical are entwined. We have parents who have lost a spouse, and we witness firsthand that loneliness and that sadness and that lack and loss of connectivity with something bigger than the individual. And to a certain degree, that leads to loss of purpose. And one of the biggest components out of the blue zones that helps people live longer, healthier, happier lives is to maintain a sense of purpose. That purpose can be to babysit your grandkids. That purpose can be to provide chemistry tuition because you were a chemistry teacher. So I know we're leaving the topic. I apologize for that, but
I think this is so important to talk about.
Important. And going back to the original topic, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong in having things delivered, but with the time you saved, can we use the time wisely? Can we use the time to actually go and for a run, or go and play tennis, or go to the neighbors and make sure they're okay?
Yeah.
But I am not sure. I don't know what we are doing with the time we have saved. And that for me has always been a topic of fascination, is what is time, right? I mean,
oh boy,
people who clean our houses, we have the car to drive, so I don't have to walk. We have the deliveries. What have I done with all the time gained? Have I translated that into something meaningful?
Yeah.
I don't know the answer.
Yes. I completely agree. A great book, if you want to read it, around that is Oliver Berkman's 4,000 Weeks.
Okay.
Because he makes that same point that it's like our lives have gotten so much easier with all of this technology and the things that are available to us, but what are we actually doing with that extra time?
Yeah.
And it does it makes you think in your own life. You're like, oh yeah, what am I doing with all that extra time? Is it most beneficial for me? So no, I think that's a great thing to look at. And just to wrap up on the physical activity thing, I think this is another one like nutrition, where there's almost like these camps of like, oh, it's HIIT workouts are the thing, or running is the thing, or swim runs are the thing, or all these different things. Again, this is an exploration for you to find what works for you. And it really, let's be honest, walking, one of the best exercises that you can do. So if anything, just start walking a little bit more, and then start, try maybe to delve into, but you don't have to go hardcore into all these like extreme workout plans to start getting more movement.
Yes, you raise a good point. The French people eat a diet that is much richer in butters than even the American diet, and yet they seem to have less of an obesity, overweight issue.
Yeah.
They walk. I don't think they're necessarily more into extreme sports. I think they're much less so than Americans. But they walk. So absolutely right, Kristen.
It really is the simple things. I mean, I know some of these sound trite because they've been oversaid too many times, but like park farther away from the building in the parking lot so that you have to walk in a little bit further, take the stairs instead of taking the elevator or the escalator. On your lunch break with that 5 maybe extra minutes that you have, get up and just go do a lap around your building, around your office space. Just little things like that can make a really big difference, I think.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to dive into I should say it's a favorite topic, but it's my least favorite because I struggle with it. Sleep.
Oh, well, yeah, sleep is, I think until recently has been underemphasized. But I think, again, due to many of the things we've spoken about, people sleep less and less. I think we, again, particularly in the US, are so driven to succeed and to work and to see those two things as the same thing.
Yep.
And then there are so many things we want to do, right? Because we have so many more opportunities. Life has become so easy. There's so many things we want to do that sleep just takes second place. And I will admit that until a few years ago, I was very guilty of that. I always was the person who felt like there are so many things I want to explore in life. There is so much richness out there. I just cannot go to sleep. And as a child, I was horrible to put to sleep as a baby, a child, because there was so much life. So I completely understand that. However, what I have found is that particularly the contrast between being in training for my residency to become a pediatric oncologist, where those days I would start working on a Monday morning and I would work nonstop until a Tuesday afternoon or sometimes Tuesday evening. And then I would sleep Tuesday night. It would start again Wednesday morning. That was actually a time where I did not sleep very much. But it was not a time where I could explore the riches. And that really contrasted with when I started to do ultra running, which I admit it's an extreme sport. I learned I needed to sleep more. And so for many years, I've been sleeping religiously 8 hours a night. And what I can say is it does make a huge difference on one's ability to be fresh, to feel well. Again, this introspection into how does my body feel? Let's check in on my own body, on the ability to concentrate, and quite frankly, on the ability to perform and performance and success. So it is self-defeating to not sleep. I think most people don't sleep not because they are so engrossed in the riches of life. I think we just get busy.
Yeah.
And so again, the treatments are, people are sick and tired of hearing that, but sleep hygiene, go to sleep at the same time, wake up at the same time, no electronics in the bedroom.
That's a big one.
Yeah, don't watch an exciting movie.
Just have the hardest time just setting that phone in a different room for an 8-hour period of time.
Yeah. Don't watch an exciting movie before going to sleep. That's the mistake I made last night, and I couldn't sleep for a few hours. Come up with a soothing routine.
Mhm.
What works for me is put my phone away, no movies, and stretching in the evening.
Mhm.
To me. Again, Kristen, very much every individual is different. We know that the average human's brain as an adult benefits from 7 to 9 hours of sleep.
Yes.
Again, plus minus. And then there are
Yep.
those, somebody just discovered the gene for people who only need 4 hours. My dad never needed more than 4, and I was so jealous. And some people need more, but that's kind of what we know the brain needs. But then figure out for yourself what works best. Some people go to sleep very late and wake up late, and some people can accommodate their jobs with that, and some people it's the other way around. Figure out, are you an early morning person or a late evening person? Get in touch with your own body, your own mind-body continuum, more
Yes.
appropriately, and learn the benefits of sleep. And it takes some time to recondition your body to be, and mainly your mind, right? Your body can sleep, it's your mind that won't sleep.
Yep. Yep.
To meditation might help.
Yep.
Soothing music might help. Doing a mind-body check-in might help. It does take time, and it does take emphasizing how important it is.
Yeah.
Lacking sleep has been linked to many chronic illnesses, diabetes, depression, anxiety,
Obesity.
obesity. So, it seems to me, Kristen, the more we talk, the more the common denominator seems to be get in touch with your own self, right?
Yes.
And we have created this noise around us, which has translated into a noise within us. And I am guilty, just like anybody else, to surround myself with noise because I am so eager to live, right?
Mhm.
There's so
Yeah.
many things I want to do and live as fully as possible. And sometimes the lesson is to just be quiet enables you to live better. But that's hard to do.
It is hard. It's a practice. I definitely will say that at one point in my life, I was very much in the go, 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 I can sleep when I die mentality. Whereas it took, I'm not going to lie, a couple of years to really get to the point where I was comfortable with it being quiet and being okay with being by myself and being quiet. And there's so much research around what the cell phones, the tablets, just being connected to this screen, to this device, how it's impacting us in negative ways, especially when it comes to sleep, when it comes to stress levels. And so I think it's everybody's going to do what they want to do, but I guess my challenge is to just try it. Just try to ease into that practice and see what happens, because I think you'll be surprised how drastically it can shift things for you. I guess for me too, the struggle with the sleep thing, now that we have all this research that has come out that shows how important sleep truly is for all this variety of reasons, I look at healthcare, and it's still one of those industries that pays zero attention to what the sleep studies or sleep research have to say. You've got people that are called in the middle of the night on call. You've got people that are working the graveyard shifts and never really actually see the light of day, or they're having to flip-flop their circadian rhythms every couple of days so that they can function with their family and their day life, but also work this graveyard shift at night. Thinking of residents that do 24-hour shifts without any sleep at all. And I don't know, I wouldn't want to get the doctor who'd been awake for like 36 hours. That's a little scary. And I even felt that as an ultrasound tech. If I had been called in, the night before and had to come to work the next day, I am not all the faculties are not there. And if I had been called in too much or on too many days of call, it just starts to compound. And it got to a point where it's like, I don't even know if this is safe, for me to be doing this, and are they actually getting the best care possible? Yeah. So what are your thoughts on the healthcare industry in that aspect? And if you were to come up with some solutions, what would they be?
Yeah. First off, thank you for being safety-minded enough to admit that you got to a point where you were wondering whether that was safe, because that is very, very true. And studies show that it is very detrimental to a person's health to have these chronic circadian cycle distortions, if you will. And, you know, there are consequences for people who work night shift only or who flip-flop and shift work, generally speaking. The example I gave about how many hours I worked, that has changed. The American ACGME, not sure what that stands for, but I think it's the Council for Medical Education and Graduate Medical Education. They actually completely revolutionized how residents and fellows are allowed to work nowadays. So there are restricted duty hours. There are only so many hours you can work consecutively. Then you have to take a nap, you have to go home, you have to sleep. It is now mandated to follow those rules. And the argument is it's a safety argument. I think that is very, very good, because I can tell from my own experience, as you have shared, Kristen, that you don't fire on all your cylinders if you're exhausted. It feels like being completely stuffed and hungover at the same time. It's a very unpleasant feeling, but it's not about what I feel. It's about how I can draw on my faculties of memory, critical thinking, decision making, and speed of decision making. All of these we know 100%. Proven are affected by this. But I will flip it the other way around and say, while this might be good for safety, and it might be is good for the training experience of those young physicians, I am not convinced it is good for patients, except for the safety component. A child who was admitted on my service when I was a trainee would see me every day and almost every night. Every couple of nights, there would be somebody else. But there was a continuity. This child knew me, so they could trust me. I would know about the child's temperament. I would know if they were anxious or not, and what worked for them and what didn't. I knew how involved that parent wanted to be, and I could be a better doctor as a consequence. Now, the shift work mentality is such that patients oftentimes don't even know who the doctor is, because there's a night doctor and a day doctor and a second cover doctor and there's a third doctor, and it's difficult. I don't think that trust is necessarily as good. I wonder, every time there's a sign-off or a handoff between physicians, even between nurses, which means that a physician who leaves the shift would tell the physician coming on what's going on. We know from safety studies, the greatest risk of errors occurring is in a handoff, because it is transfer of information from A to B. So I wonder how that is going. And I also wonder, from the training perspective, if I was always on call or working a lot, I could see a disease unfold. I could see how the child got worse and then better. So you left me with the question, what would I propose? And that's a very difficult one. And I don't think I have the good answer. I
don't know that there is a good answer.
I think one component of a good answer would be to have the primary care physician more involved, because the primary care physician could fill in the gaps and the blanks. But primary care physicians are very pressed for time due to the reimbursement of primary care. They have to see many, many patients to make ends meet. And that does not allow them to, like half a generation ago, when primary care docs, who I'm friends with, used to finish their practice, and then they would go to the hospital to visit their patients who were hospitalized. So I think there would be many components. And I think, once again, the answer lies in balance. We have to find a balance to not overwork people and cause unsafe environments. We also need to get creative, and creativity takes time and takes many people throwing their ideas onto a table. We need to be creative to figure out a way of how to provide seamless care while providing some modicum of shift work. I don't have a good answer. I don't think anybody does. I think this just needs to be addressed and tackled. Healthcare is at a breaking point, has been at a breaking point for years. I was waiting for it to break so we could rebuild it, but it hasn't happened.
I'll let you know when it happens.
We need to figure out a way to make things better.
Agreed. It is definitely a failing industry, and I don't say that monetarily, because monetarily, I think there's several large healthcare corporations that are making very good money. I think some of that maybe needs to filter down to some of the community hospitals a little bit more. But it's just so yeah, which, kind of like what you were talking about, having all these different doctors, when my dad was in the hospital, there was the infectious disease doctor, there was the nephrologist, there was the hospitalist who was there during the day, then the hospitalist who was there during the night, but it didn't always end up being the same day-night hospitalist, because they were in rotation too.
Yeah.
Different nurse in the morning, different nurse at night, and sometimes those never matched up again. Then you, on top of that, have people coming in from echo, from ultrasound, x-ray, to do all these things. And he was so confused, and it was upsetting to him. He's like, well, because people will come in the room and they'll just start talking to me like I'm supposed to know who they are.
Who are you?
And I don't know who they are, and it's like, and how do you know all this stuff about me?
Yeah.
And he's like, and other people would come in and they would just do their test or draw the blood, and they wouldn't say a word to me the entire time that they were in the room, telling me why they're doing this thing. What are you drawing the blood for? Or what is this ultrasound for? And I, just from being so involved in his care, caught several mistakes that were made, obviously not sentinel events, but mistakes nonetheless. And every single one of them happened during handoff, where there was no communication, like verbal communication, between the two doctors.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was in their notes, but not every doctor coming on is going to go read through. They don't have time for that, to be honest, to go through and read all the notes before they, go in to do that. That's what SBAR is, what we use. That's what SBAR is for, is so that when you're in that change, and I know the nurses are really great about it, like during shift change, they actually walk and they do like go into the patient's room, and it's one nurse giving information to the nurse with the patient there. And they hope in that sense to keep the continuity of care, where it's almost like somebody now that you trust, now I'm handing you off to somebody else that you can trust, which feels really good to me, I think, in that sense. So I think, there's so many issues, and the lack of sleep. I mean, I think it is going to take a creative idea to make that work. But the hard part is, it's like you can't have availability all the time and people be thriving, because you never know when that thing is going to happen that person needs to be there for.
Yeah, that's the other thing that I won't go into details because it's dangerous. I would fall asleep driving after a long shift. And that is horrible, and that is horrifying. And that just should not happen.
Yeah. But I got pulled over for drunk driving coming home I was on my way back home after being called in. I got pulled because I was swerving over the sideline. And he thought I was drunk, and I'm like, no, I'm not drunk. I'm just tired. And I was just at the hospital. You can call them.
Yeah.
He's like, you need to be more careful about driving. I like, stay there till you feel awake. And I'm like, I never feel awake there. Like,
yeah. Healthcare has done things to try to improve. For instance, if a resident feels very, very hungover after call, certain programs allow them to call an Uber to take them home.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Hospital rooms now have whiteboards that I'm sure you've seen, where the nurse will document the name of the different doctors and who they are. If a child is very complexly ill, and as you mentioned, like with your dad, has multiple specialty physicians involved, they periodically try to do group rounds or a sit down, like a care conference, where everybody has the chance to speak and the parents hear everybody.
Yep.
What I used to do is I would always designate one physician as the pilot of this child's plane flight. And, if this child had cancer, I was the pilot, and I would be the one to collect the input and the recommendations from all the specialists. And I would summarize them to the family, which didn't prevent the specialists to speak to them as well. But there was one person who pulled it all together. So I think there are things going on, but we have not figured out how to do it perfectly.
Yeah, I agree. It's a work in progress, hopefully.
Yeah.
So just keep working on it. So you talk about the things that lead up to a shorter life expectancy for us and living in the Western way. what components are lending to that?
Well, I think we've talked about the fact that we are much more focused on work and success.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that other countries are either catching up. I'm thinking of India,
Mm-hmm.
or have it worse than we do. I'm thinking of South Korea and Japan, and increasingly China. So I think that culture is very, very an important component. I think another important component is what we value in life. And I think we've moved away from valuing the little things like family, or just spending time at home, or spending time walking in nature.
Mm-hmm.
We've lost that connectivity. I will say that I believe, and I think I've read a lot about this, the COVID-19 pandemic has changed that. I mean, we had the big walkout, and with people resigning and not going back to work. We have people doing the absolute minimum at work. We have people disengaged from work. I contrast the American way of being so focused on work to the Austrian way, which I can speak to better than others. And I will just give you one example. Mm-hmm. Many years ago, I think I was in medical school, or maybe even high school. There was a referendum in Austria asking the following question. Shops would close at 5 p.m. every weekday. They would close at 1 p.m. on Saturdays, and were closed on Sundays. If you wanted milk or bread on a Sunday, you had to go to the gas station. So when I was in med school or high school, the referendum asked the Austrian people the following question. Would you like to extend store hours to include, I can't remember the exact language, but I think it was being open all day Saturday and half a day Sunday. And you would get paid more, of course, because you work more. The Austrian people said no. No, thank you. No, thank you. We will continue. And the reason given was we want to spend time with our families. And so a compromise was made. So stores on Thursdays could stay open until, I think, 8 p.m. and stores could stay open a little longer on Saturdays. But this story, huge contrast for when I moved to the US, where the grocery stores open 24/7. And I never shop at 2 a.m. And if I needed to, I could wait until 9 or 7.
Yeah.
But be that as it may, I think that's one component, is a focus on work,
yeah,
and on comfort, mm-hmm. and a focus away from things that used to be important to us. But I think COVID has taught us a lesson. I think it has started to it has made people think, so how important is this work? Mm-hmm. It is very sad for me to hear that many people, if they were to win the lottery, they would just stop working. This is the amount of love or drive or purpose or fulfillment or meaning they derive from their work. That's terribly sad. If I won the lottery, I would buy my husband a Bentley and I would keep working.
I think when people say that, it speaks a lot maybe to the job or career or the work that they're doing at the time. If you hate it, then if you won the lottery, you'd be like, I'm not going back to that soul-sucking job. But if it's something that really brings you purpose and fulfills you, I think those are the people that would say, if I won the lottery, I wouldn't stop working, but I would invest in something, some way, shape, or form. My husband's Bentley. I would take a sweet, nice vacation for a month to just decompress before I came back to work, so I could come back refreshed. But we
have created an environment at work. Where, and I remember my fellowship days, where it was a badge of honor to be the last to turn off your light in the office. Where if you left earlier or at a regular time, well, you were just not working very hard. And nobody could see what I was doing at home. I might have been studying until 1 a.m. or not, but we have created, I think, an environment where people feel they have to apologize if they have to skip out at 5 to pick up the child from whatever, or to take care of their mother who's ill, or whatever, or to go for a run.
Yeah.
And
I was just about to say, like, everybody always has like I got to get my kids, or I got to do something for my husband or my family or whatever. And I'm like, what about the single girl over here who's like, I would just like to get out a little bit early so that I can run before it gets dark, because I am too worried about running after dark by myself.
Yeah.
And that should be just as valid, because it's it's the things that bring us meaning in life that are outside of work. That's what makes us that whole person. If we didn't have those things, we're not going to be as productive and happy in our work environments if we're not getting our cup filled in other areas.
Exactly. And I think it goes back again to what seems to have been the red thread in our conversation. It's balance.
Yes.
I happen to be very driven, but I'm driven at work and at home and in my private life. And both can coexist in balance.
Yes.
And as long as I don't overdo the driven part, I can be successful, and I can be balanced, and I can be happy. Yes. So I think that's really important. And what, again, going back to that Blue Zone documentary, having something in your life that gives your life purpose and meaning, and that can be gardening. There was this one old gentleman, I think it was in Japan, who made samurai swords, and he was 93, and he just made those swords. And that gave his life meaning and purpose. And just finding that spot of wholeness and balance. And I think that's outward looking, but inward looking, what that means is listening to yourself, listening to your mind, body continuum. And I don't think we listen to ourselves enough. Again, putting on my pediatrician hat. Children nowadays, they used to go out and play. And there are books written by sociologists of how important that is for the development of a human being, to have that nothing time to just do nothing. You would go out with your friends and you would do something or other. You might play make-believe, you might, look at trees, you might climb a tree, you might whatever, chase your friends. That was unsupervised free time, which I think taught you to listen to yourself. And now, and that is bemoaned by many, people in pedagogical scientific studies, that children are being driven from school to soccer practice, to piano practice. Then they get home at 8 p.m. Then they have to do homework, and they go to bed, guess what, late with their iPhone, so they don't sleep enough, etc.
Tricky.
So, and so it seems to me, I wonder whether infusing a little bit of quiet time into a child's life and into an adult's life would lead to being able to listen to oneself more. And the human body, and this I'm going out on a limb by saying that because I've not seen any science, but I think the human body is built to survive. Otherwise, we wouldn't have survived, right? We are pathetic creatures. We have no sharp teeth. We have no claws. We are, compared to other animals, not what we have is up here. I think our bodies know there's this wisdom inside our bodies instinctively what to do. We just don't listen. I think we've lost the capacity to listen. And my parents, drove me to be successful, but they also gave me time to just be. That could be reading a book, it could be painting, it could be looking out the window, it could be going for a walk, it could be chatting with friends. That time that you can choose based on who you are, as you always point out, the individuality, to just listen to yourself.
I completely agree. I actually call this white noise time. I scheduled this into my day where I put it, it's not always like 30 minutes like I would like it to be. Sometimes I have to shorten it to like 15, 20. And I just stop, right? And it's like, just be. That is when the creative hits drop, is when you give them space to drop in. It's also a really good time because that's when you notice something that maybe you didn't notice because you were rushing around so busy. You're like, oh, I got that like tweak in my back. Well, where did that come from? Kind of thing. Well, you were rushing around, you didn't even notice it, kind of thing. So even 15, 20 minutes a day, I think it should be far more for children because they are so imaginative and creative. They need more time to like let that flow. Is give yourself that time just to be and just see what comes up. Is it a new idea? Is it just some insight that you just get because you finally slowed down enough that your intuition can speak to you in that moment? Again, I think that's one of those small little things that we can integrate into our days that I think will bring a big shift.
Yeah, you brought up creativity, and the scientist who discovered the fact that the carbon is in this circular form, he came up with that concept in a dream. And we know Csikszentmihalyi, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, he's the one who coined the term flow, to be in
state.
flow.
Yep.
And that is very akin or similar to what Oriental cultures do in their martial arts. Or, sweep your driveway, do your dishes, wax the car. Remember that movie?
Wax on, wax off.
Yeah, exactly. Those times, and now the modern business literature, Harvard Business Review, etc., etc. If you want a breakthrough in your business, you might find it while you're taking a shower, taking your dog for a walk. Those are all moments of inner quiet or of flow, which is when we eliminate the clatter, chatter, the monkey brain, and allow whatever's sitting there to randomly or triggered pop up. And I think that is very important for success.
It is.
But also for the growth of our mind.
Yes, absolutely. I wonder, because you're an ultra runner, I'm a runner as well. Do you find flow state in running?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Constantly. Yeah. Otherwise you couldn't run for 7, 9, 12 hours.
Fair point.
Yeah. Some people apparently don't. I don't know how they keep their minds busy, but yeah, I do. Very quickly.
The other one I don't get is people who say they don't get the runner's high. And I'm like, ever? Not ever have you gotten the runner's high? And they're like, never. I'm like, oof, then running's got to be a bummer, because that's when you get that, that's what makes you go 12 more miles.
I wonder whether those people don't allow themselves to stop the chatter, to just be.
Yeah, they're just constantly thinking in the that's interesting.
I've heard people who one person who was getting ready to defend his PhD, and he was rehearsing his dissertation presentation while running ultras. I guess you could do that. Why not?
To each their own. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap up on this last question. What are the social determinants of health? Yes,
that is very similar to, beautiful, you close the loop, very similar to the concept of epigenetics. The social determinants of health are things in our environment that directly influence our health. And so big ones are poverty, exposure to or victimhood of violence, stress of any kind, would be unavailability of food, would be being bullied, being threatened, all of these components. And if we think about what they really are social. Those are things that arise in our environment that surrounds us. And that is particularly important for children, because children are part of the community and the environment because they are so helpless initially, and because they cannot run away until a certain age. So they are really captive of this environment. And so the social determinants of health have a critical impact on chronic disease and health outcomes of children who are exposed to them. And so, again, as I mentioned, certainly lung, liver disease, chronic disease, but also diabetes, heart conditions, obesity, mental health disease, all of these very physical conditions are created, that's a bad word, but you know what I mean, by certain social events that surround us in our childhood. And the way this happens is through epigenetics, where these stressors that our environment imposes on us change the way certain genes are expressed or not expressed, which then leads to physical ailments, particularly chronic disease down the road. And the beauty of let's start with the tragedy and end with something positive. The tragedy of social determinants of health is that once this is transmitted from, let's say, a woman is pregnant and is subjected to abuse, physical and emotional, that epigenetic change that the mother experiences can be experienced by the unborn child. That's the tragedy, that it goes through generations. We don't know how many. The beauty of it is that we know this. We know it.
Yes.
We know that growing up in poverty, being surrounded by abuse and being bullied, all of and in food deserts where there is no appropriate nourishment to be gotten, we know that these cause disease. So we should be able to address them. And to the kudos for many healthcare systems that are partnering with community entities such as housing development, such as farmers markets, such as the police department, park and recreations to create safe spaces to play, school systems. Those health systems are partnering with community entities to try and improve those social determinants of health. So important, not spoken about often enough. Healthcare systems that are including specific questions in their patient intake to assess whether there is a social determinant so that they can counteract that.
Yeah.
So a big topic of passion to me, because it is something you can prevent, and it is something that has such a long-lasting impact.
I agree. I 120% agree. And I think that's, when you were talking about that, I was like, so all the extra time that we're saving by using DoorDash and order your groceries and just pick them up, take that extra time and find one of these community resource groups that are around working around these social determinants to make them better and get involved. Like, spend your time making your community better. I know that this isn't for everybody, but volunteering, as much as you feel like it's helping others, it helps the person who's volunteering far more. Yeah. I just think that's for me, that's call to action to the listeners, is to look into this and see how you can be a part of making a change around this part of our society and environment.
Two of my friends actually volunteer at Boys and Girls Club, one in Kentucky, one in California. They have direct impact on children who might not have the opportunity to see beyond what the environment offers them. And that is changing a life right there.
Yep. Oh, Divya, this has been such a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I've learned so much.
I loved it.
And I really do. I felt like we hit like this whole sphere of the physical pillar in so many different ways. Your knowledge is just incredible. And I feel so fortunate to have been a part of just listening to your wisdom from all of your years of experience in life and in healthcare. So typically I wrap up the show by asking a question, which to you would be, if I were to offer up what it means to thrive in life, what comes up for you?
I would like to believe two things. I would like to get to a point in my life where I feel that I can contribute in whatever little way to make the world a better place. And that can be for plants, for animals, for humans, for the world, to contribute, to make this a better place, a more beautiful place, a more wholesome place for everybody. The second thing is, this is outward looking. Inward looking, the selfish part, is that I would like to be able to use my life to learn and absorb as much as possible, be that knowledge, be it insight, be it wisdom, to make me a person who can be there fully for other people and who can bring love and light and joy and hope and a sense of purpose to other people as I engage in mutually beautiful relationships with them.
It's beautiful. I love that. I think that's great. So if our listeners wanted to reach out to you, connect with you, where would they find you out in the world?
I think LinkedIn might be the easiest way to find
Okay.
me.
Okay.
I check that pretty regularly
Okay.
and would be happy to connect with anybody. Yes, I think we increasingly, as I get older, I see us even more integrated and connected.
Yes.
And a beautiful network of human beings of all different kinds who believe in all different things. And that is very wonderful.
I love that. I love that. So we will put a link to Divya's LinkedIn page in the show notes that you can reach out to her. So that brings us to an end. Divya, thank you so much again for taking the time to come on today and talk with me about these super important topics. And I look forward to hopefully having a discussion with you again at some point down the road.
Kristen, I wanted to thank you. This was a very, very wonderful and exciting experience. Thank you for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been my pleasure. Trust me. All right, Divya, thanks so much.